Good afternoon, everyone. Today, our topic is observational research. It's chapter number 8. First of all, let's look at our learning objectives. We have 4 learning objectives for today's lecture. Number 1, to develop a basic understanding of observational research. Number 2, try to understand different approaches to observational research. Number 3, to understand the pros and cons of observational research. Number 4, to learn about observational research on the internet. Before we get into concepts and our lectures, let's look at the one particular company whose business is based upon observational research. I remember this is a company that I got to know when I was a PhD student, like almost 20 years ago, Envirocell. At that time, there was a little tiny companies and it was very small clients. And as of today, it has become one of the largest market research firm in the world, and it has lots of blue chip clients, multinational companies, big banks, big food companies, and restaurants. It's just huge company. So let's look at this website, and I encourage you to explore it for more information afterwards. So let's look at one of the videos it has. Okay.
We did a study of a category of goods, a very traditional category of goods. They created a brand new bottle. This is a product, a whiskey, that is a very traditional old whiskey that has a great brand tradition. Wisdom was, we've got to reinvent our packaging. So what did they do? They had some focus groups. And people looked at this beautiful bottle in the context of that focus group room where they could pick it up and look at it in perfect lighting. And they, oh, that's a great bottle. I really love it. It really tells me something about the brand. But you know what? We went out and looked at that on the shelf as it exists on the shelf. And what we found is, because of the coloring of it, nobody could see it. It blends into the background of all the store fixtures. So what we find to be true in a focus group facility may not actually respond to the realities of what goes on in store.
Well, that's very fascinating video, right? So obviously that gave us kind of incentive why we study observation research. And we have studied a focus group, and we know the advantage of focus groups. And focus group is a great research tool. And then now we're going to introduce another tool called observation research. Now, first of all, what is it? Observation research, basically, it is the systematic process of recording patterns of occurrences or behaviors without normally communicating with the people involved. So there are 3 keywords in this definition. Number 1 is called systematic. Okay, systematic process means that you have to do it, repeatedly, not just once or twice. I mean, you have to do it again and again to find out what's going on. And also look at the second word called patterns. Okay, so when we do research, we're trying to make sense of what's going on. If it's a recurring theme or continuous, continuously repeating behavior, and then we know something's going on. Now, the third is important things I'll talk about without communicating with the people involved. So this is very important because normally we don't communicate with the subjects under observations. So we look at observation research. Really, we usually have to make sure it meets 3 different conditions in order for our observation research to be feasible. The first, that the information we needed must be either observable or inferable. Okay, Number two is that the behavior should be repetitive, frequent, or in some manner predictable. Number three is called the duration must be relatively short. Okay, so how do we understand this kind of conditions? Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say cereal shopping, right? Okay, it's a very common thing, and most people, Americans, especially breakfast, we buy cereal products, and it's a big business. It's so we let's say I assign some of you guys go assignment like a cereal shopping, and you need to go to Albertson to observe how people buy cereal products for, let's say, 2 hours, and then you get lots of information from this observing people's buying cereal products. So for example, the information, the behavior observable obviously, and for example, how many products, how many products they buy, and how long they stay, and how they buy the product. For example, do they just grab the boxes and put into their shopping cart and just go, or are they looking around for a long time and figure out which one to buy, or are they carrying some coupons in their hands? Those are the observable. Other things could be inferable. For example, let's say their ethnicity or their age. You can just take a guess. And also the cereal shopping behavior is kind of repetitive and also frequent. It's not, people buy cereal products pretty much repetitively, frequently, and usually predictably means that you have this behavior. If you already know what you want, and you just grab and put in the shopping basket, you'll do it again and again the same way. And also the behavior must be usually short, like, so for example, the behavior, the buying cereal product behavior is very relatively short, right? It's go 5 minutes sometimes, or it's 1 minute, and then your observational duration is very, very short. I mean, maximum 2 hours for observing people's cereal buying behavior, right? So let's look at different approaches to observational research. Now, obviously, we have people versus machine, right? People watching people, people watching phenomenon. Machine watching people, machine watching phenomenon. Well, people watching people, obviously, it's very simple, right? In the example I given to you, about a cereal shopping. I mean, we observe people buying cereal products. And also we can say, well, we observe people watching phenomenon. Okay, so for example, the textbook example talk about we can observe how many vehicles moving in different directions, so that we need to establish whether we find a need for traffic light. Remember that traffic light that just the traffic light that just downstairs the College Park, and we across the College Park from to the LH building. I mean, we have lots of accidents happen over there, and so obviously in order to establish the need for set up like a no right turn traffic light, you need to get some research done, right? So you need to observe how many vehicles passing in this right turn directions, so that and then also to see how people move around across the street, how many of them, how often. As far as the machine watching people are concerned, I mean, this is the day of or the age of monitoring or surveillance. The cameras everywhere, and no matter where you go, you are being observed. And some places they tell you, other places they don't even tell you. So, and then obviously the malls and the stores, they use camera to observe people behavior, and they do study them. And for example, the Envirocell, the company, they just take those videos and analyze to figure out the people's shopping patterns, and they make some changes. And especially the merchandising, they want to find out what's going on, how people come and how long they stay, and which products sell fast. I mean, The perfect example would be like IKEA. IKEA is merchandising. I mean, I'm sure they study people intensively, try to find out how to maximize the, the dollar spent at the store by setting up something that in a pattern, like the predetermined path people have to follow, before they get out of the place. And the machine watching phenomenon, obviously, that's also very common. I mean, for example, at the intersection, you still have people watching how many vehicles passing in different directions. We can have machines count the vehicles and then to figure out whether we need to do something about the traffic. So those are the four different approaches to observational research. Now let's look at the nature of observational research. In other words, we can look at observational research from different angles or different perspectives. And the first angle is that we look at from the lens of to see whether observational research is natural versus contrived. By natural, we mean that we observe something going on and with naturally occurring event, like for example traffic, vehicles passing come and go, and or in the example of cereal shopping, and you just observe people come and go buying cereal products one after another. It's basically natural phenomenon. Okay, so and other situations, actually the observation research are much more artificial or contrived. They made up environment. For example, in the focus group, for example, we observe people in the kind of fishbowl, inside like conference room, like we call it, with a one-way mirror. So people, we set up this situation, and people know that they kind of in the non-natural environment, and they are being observed. And the second angle or perspective looking at the observation research is that to see if the subjects are aware of the purpose of the research. Again, going back to the focus group observation research, like normally that we tell the participants the general purpose of the research, whether it's a politics or it's shopping or it's something else. And so it's really open. I mean, they know what's the purpose of your research. Not exactly sure, but in general. And the other type is less. It's like disguised. Like usually in the case of experimentation, which we're going to talk about next week, is that they don't know the purpose of research. It's disguised. It's a hidden. So that's open versus disguised. The third approach or third angle is looking at whether we use human or use a machine to capture data. Now, nowadays in the age of big data, machines are really in charge. I mean, we talk about the big data. We have 5 V's describing the big data, and the machines are running the show. And it's impossible for humans to capture so much online data, for example, social media data. They're just trillions, or hundreds of trillions of bytes, data. I mean, I don't even know zillion or gazillion, those are the words that describe the number, the scale of the data we can capture. The fourth angle that we're looking at is called a structured versus unstructured. So let's go back to the example of cereal shopping. You can do it two different ways. One way is that you can go there without having any notes, just observe, standing there, making general impression of how people go about buying their shopping, go about shopping their cereal products, right? And then you for maybe 2 hours, and then you get some holistic understanding of how people buy their cereal products. The different ways that you can take detailed notes. You can start with, like, say, the profile of this person, the age, the gender, the ethnicity, and then also how much time is spent. You can record the time, and then how they go about choosing their products. You have so much detail. So this is more structured. Now, obviously, structured is better in capturing data. The final approach or angle we look at observation research is direct versus indirect. The example I given to you, previous example like serial shopping or like watching traffic, those are direct observation. But other times we need to go through an indirect way to get data. One good example called garbage, right? You dig through people's garbage to find out what they actually do. The good example would be something like you ask people how much alcoholic beverage they consume per week. They normally don't tell you, the truth. I mean, it's socially undesirable to be perceived as, drink a lot. I mean, so usually they underreport the amount of alcohol they consume. But if you have a way of digging through their garbage, right? So weekly garbage. I mean, then you count the number of cans or beers or number of bottles of wine or liquor. I mean, you get a very realistic picture, actual picture of how much alcoholic beverage they consume. So that's why kind of consumer research many times they go to the extreme to dig into people's garbage. So I'm not sure if you probably need to get a consent from the city or from the to get the permission to dig into people's garbage. But some people told me that it's okay, it's in public domain, you can go there and dig into people's garbages. I suppose that sometimes you see some people do recycling stuff, they dig into people's garbage and then nobody complains about it. I suppose it's okay. Now let's talk about the advantage of observation research. The first one is very obvious. You see what actual people do rather than what they say they do. It's not people lie. It's just sometimes people have bad memory. They don't remember well what they do. So if you have something recorded, observe them actually they do. I mean, it's a real data, and it's the first kind of information. It's much less to bias. It's like memory. And also, observation research, you can get it very quickly. You can set up this research very quickly and then get the relatively accurate data. It's a simple, easy, okay? And obviously, observation research is very, very important for retailers, especially like scanners, okay? Instead of manual counting, you can use electronic stuff to count. And remember last time we played a video about the role of scanners in the retail revolution. And it's really important. This little scanner changed how business is conducted. The shift in power from manufacturers to retailers. Now obviously we talked about already, like the power has been shifted to consumers with clicks, like of search, right? So the last advantage is that it talk about the buying from the clients. When you have observation research, your clients can share the experience observing with the researcher, so that they get a first-hand experience of doing research with the researchers, and then it's similar to what one of the advantages of focus group, that you get the buy-in from the researcher, from the client directly. So that's very, very important, because you want to make sure that you make them happy, keep the research clients, and keep your business going if you're a research firm. The disadvantage of observation research are obvious, right? Number one is talk about the only behavior can be measured, right? You can just observe what's going on the surface, but what's going on underneath, motivation, beliefs, intentions, feelings, those are you cannot observe. I mean, you have to measure it. You have to ask them, right? So that's not a good thing, in terms of the observation research. And obviously, observation research, usually you're not able to get a good representation of the general population. In other words, it's difficult to get a representative sample of the general population of your interest. So you tend to be not representative of the population. That's always a concern from a researcher's perspective. And also, observation could be somewhat subjective, right? Depending on observational type. For example, if it's a focus group type observation research, then interpretation is subjective. Obviously, if you do this machine counting traffic, I mean, it's very objective, not subjective at all. And again, associated with type of observational research, and then the data analysis could be more qualitative than quantitative. I mean, for example, focus group research could be more qualitative. I mean, we especially with a small sample size, it could be more quantitative than qualitative, more qualitative than quantitative. Make sure that these two words you don't confuse. It's very, very important. And also, observational research can be very expensive, time-consuming if subjects are not readily available. So obviously, that's something the bigger barrier to observational research, the cost and time. Last observational research disadvantage is that it's a time sensitive, right? You observe, it's a snapshot, and you cannot just extrapolate this results to some other time. So this is something that we keep in mind. Those some of the disadvantages of observational research. Now, remember we talked about scanner last time, so I'm gonna just pause here and then let's watch a video so that we can look at the role of the scanner, which is very, very important. It's a scanner. It's observational research type of. We use scanner to research, do lots of research. Okay, let's watch this one. This video is about 8 minutes. Let's watch it together.
In recent years, the traditional nuclear American family has given way to myriad options. Marketers who depend on established segmentation may find themselves in uncharted territory.
People no longer progress through life in a predictable way. Instead of getting married at 20 and having kids right away and then their kids grow up and have families of their own, what you're seeing is people are waiting longer to get married and they're often divorcing and creating fractured households and recombining into new households. Adult children are coming back to live with their parents, sometimes multiple times. So when you look at the consumer, the household and the framework that they live in looks quite different than it did 20 years ago.
In order to create a more meaningful image of the American consumer, market research giant AC Nielsen brings Spectra BehaviorScape to its clients. BehaviorScape is an innovative segmentation tool that classifies consumers based on how they behave, rather than by traditional demographic data alone.
BehaviorScape takes actual behavioral data and looks at those underlying consumer dynamics that predict where behavior will change. Our clients are manufacturers and retailers in the fast-moving consumer goods industry, and by that I mean products like Tide and toothpaste. These are the products that people buy every day.
BehaviorScape uses information collected from AC Nielsen's HomeScan consumer panel.
The HomeScan panel has 125,000 households across the country who actually scan every purchase that they make, and they use a handheld scanner like this, and when that grocery item is taken out of the bag, they actually scan it and they send that information to us. So we know not only what they purchased, but we also know where they purchased it, how much they paid for it, and other potential attitudinal questions that say why you purchased it.
With the demographic data from their HomeScan families, AC Nielsen uses BehaviorScape to analyze this data to determine desirable consumer segments.
With the HomeScan data, what we did was we looked at millions of transactions. All those scans that you saw me just do, each one of those scans is a transaction, and we looked at millions of those to understand what circumstances about a household's condition actually derives changes in purchase behavior. So we look for those nodes. If purchase goes up or it goes down, what was driving that? For example, did your household change in some way? Were more people in your household? Did you get married? Did you have children? Did your children leave home and go to college? Those behavioral nodes are what we're looking for to identify, to understand the purchase changes.
AC Nielsen has found that the presence of children in the family is the most important influence on a household's purchasing.
When you look across thousands of categories, whether or not there are children in the household is a key determiner in understanding your purchase behavior. So that's the first split we made in the data.
The age of the head of the household is another factor which influences family behavior.
What you find is when a child enters a household, the entire household revolves around that child. So somebody who has a child under the age of 6 looks very similar to somebody else in a similar condition. For example, if somebody's older than me by 10 years and they make a lot more money, will look very similar, and that our household will be centered around that child. We call this behavior stage startup families. And so if somebody's a startup family in one neighborhood versus another, we look very similar based on the fact that our children are under the age of 6. What you find in these startup families is that these older children are actually the trendsetters in the family. When they're in a startup family mode, they're driving into the household things like fish sticks and mac and cheese, traditional kid kinds of categories. You also see in the entire house revolving around their purchases, from media consumption to lifestyle activities. Everything's about kid, kid, kid in these kinds of households.
As the firstborn grows older, he or she still drives behavior.
Once you see the children leave the nest, the age of the head of household becomes the next variable that's very important. Older households with kids look quite different from the younger households with kids in that when you're older, you're more established financially, you're at a different place in your career, and your kids tend to be older. And that really shapes different things like travel and level of independence of your children. You start to see more adult-like behavior coming out of the children. So things like snacks and categories like that start to really bounce when you get to those older households with kids, which we call older bustling families.
The size of the household is also important in determining purchasing behavior.
Households with kids isn't the only determiner. What you also care about is size of household. For example, we have two groups, one called small-scale family and then our bustling families, both older and younger. Small-scale families are really hard families to get a handle on because they're often a result of different components that drive people to small-scale families. Either it's a family of divorce, and it's the family that's remaining a single mother or father with the children, or it's a family that's just starting up and has chosen only to have one child. So those small-scale families are really an interesting phenomena that never were around 20 years ago in the way that they are today. As a result of these small-scale families being formed in different ways, what you see is some interesting purchase behavior. Sometimes you see a high incidence of private label, which makes sense when you think of a single earning person in that household. Or you may see similar penetration levels for certain categories, but their buy rate or the amount they purchase is less because there are just fewer people in the household. And that would be an example like in a paper category. You compare that to the bustling families, which are much bigger, and you see they consume a lot of everything. Juice and snacks and paper products, you name it, they're the heaviest consumers of most every product category that you're looking at.
Changes in the composition of the American family have had a variety of effects on consumer behavior.
The size of the family has shrunk dramatically over the last 20 years. As I mentioned, many people are starting families later. People are choosing not to have as many children. But this phenomenon of people starting families later is a particularly interesting one. We've seen a growth in a behavior stage that we call young transitionals. This is a group of individuals who are under the age of 30 without children. Many more young transitionals than we had 50 years ago. As the name implies, young transitionals are in fact in transition. They're getting their first jobs, they're going back to school and getting additional degrees, they are changing apartments quite frequently, they may be cohabitating with somebody or maybe freshly married, but really a group of people who are in transition. And what you see as a result of that, you see certain behaviors among these consumers. You see a lot of dining out, particularly at fast food restaurants, because they have a real life on the go. And for the products that they are consuming and bringing home, things like power bars and even potato chips, some of the residual behaviors from when they were teenagers still happen in this group of consumers called young transitionals. What we're seeing with the phenomena of many adult children moving back home with their parents, you see that those, while they're classified as adults by demographers, they in fact still retain much of their teen-like behavior, and their impact on the household is to make them look a lot like the older bustling families, even though technically speaking they're no longer children.
A.C. Nielsen's Behaviorscape represents a new way of identifying and targeting important consumer groups. Rather than segmenting consumers by traditional means, Behaviorscape segments the audience according to behavioral drivers.
Behaviorscape segmentation has two axes to it. The first one we call behavior stages. And those behavior stages are things like startup families or young transitionals or established singles. They really describe what the household looks like. What's the composition of the household? Then we cross that by something we call lifestyle. And lifestyles are essentially neighborhoods that you could drive through. Let me give you an example. Cosmopolitan centers versus struggling urban cores. The power of Behaviorscape is that it allows us to translate the consumer insights that are derived from like a panel data and connect it to marketing applications. For example, I can go to a retailer and say, I understand about my consumer And now I can relate that consumer to your shopper and say, you have 20% of this kind of consumer, and oh, by the way, in this store, you have 50% of that kind of consumer, and you need to adjust your product assortment and your merchandising to meet the needs of that consumer. The power of BehaviorScape is twofold. The first is that it connects the consumer insight to actionability for our clients to help them drive very real business decisions on the ground. The second is that it's flexible and allows our clients to customize based on the changing dynamics of their category. People say the only constant is change, and it's true. And we believe that what BehaviorScape does is really put the consumer at the center in their purchase behavior and allows our clients to actually center their business around those consumer dynamics.
So okay, you just watch this behavior scanners. And I want you to think about how AC Nielsen scanner research helps segment consumer markets. It's about segmentation. I mean, that's something you need to think about it. Just based upon behavior, rather than demographics or geographics or psychographics. Those are something totally different compared with other type of segmentation. Now let's shift gear to the observational research on the internet. This is a very big topic, and if we have a couple of minutes to talk about it, it's really too shallow. But in general, I want you to just give you an overview of what it's about. I mean, now really observational research, number one is try to find out consumer behavior through the really demographic, psychographic data, pattern to predict consumer behavior. In this, for example, the Amazon would be a perfect example. Amazon has figured out a puzzle how to predict your behavior based upon your previous purchases, or even your like browsing behavior. I mean, in conjunction with other psychographic, demographic behavior data they have already acquired from other sources. They can predict what kind of the products and what kind of service you're most likely to are interested. And then, so this is very good. It's called a personalization technology that's really powerful to drive that business. And then another type of research that we look at that to facilitate, to optimize the websites like usability, so that the consumers feel much more at ease when they interact with online website, which is it's extremely important. And so especially for example the consumer like shopping cart and how they check out. Now most sites are decent, and once in a while, once upon a time, I mean, it was a big problem for consumer to check out. I mean, it's as simple as that kind of process. So we do lots of observational research, try to figure out how consumers go about doing the checkout, and obviously we also look at the consumers' click sequence patterns, try to understand what most likely could be their next type of the behavior. And the social media tracking, which is a huge topic nowadays, we track how people just talk about something, either in the Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and to see if those tweets, those pings, those Instagram, those images would be linking to some kind of the purchase or some kind of behavior. We talk about conversion, which is very important because it's all about linking the particular behavior to something much more desirable, like say sales or sometimes votes. So observational research in general, we kind of like cover the video at a very shallow level, but I think this has a huge potential and it's growing exponentially, and There's just tons of big topics. So we have covered chapter number 8 briefly, and I hope that you can just look at watch this video lecture and also read the book and try to get a really deeper understanding of the nature of observational research and the pros and cons of observational research and approaches to observational research. And in particular, I think I played this video called Behavior Scan, thinking about the how behavior scan can be used to come up with smart merchandising or retailing strategies. Okay, thank you. See you next time.